Welcome to Competitive CX, the podcast for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. If you're passionate about enhancing client experience and driving client satisfaction, you found your new favorite show.
I'm Adam Grainger, and alongside Melanie Aimer and Hamish Taylor, we delve into essential CX strategies and innovations that are shaping the future of client experience in finance.
With our diverse backgrounds in customer experience and financial services, we're going to bring you some real-world insights and thought-provoking discussions to help you navigate the complexities of delivering exceptional client experiences.
Whether you're a decision maker, a marketer, or anyone in a client-facing role in financial services, you'll find valuable takeaways to elevate your organizational CX strategies.
So come on then, subscribe now and join us in transforming client experience and gaining that competitive edge.
Let's dive in. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to wherever you are. Welcome to our podcast series called Competitive CX. Now, in our last episode, we discussed organizational structures that get in the way of CX, and hopefully you got some pieces of advice, practical pieces of advice about what we could do to overcome those. But today we're going to discuss incentives that inadvertently deprioritize CX. Now, in the future, we'll discuss whether technology is an enabler or a disabler. That's also another one I'm looking forward to, and hopefully we'll discuss AI there. Now, if you've dialed in before, welcome back. And if you're new, my name is Melanie Aimer. And for the last 20 years, I've been championing the role of client experience within different areas of financial services, from capital markets, asset management, private banking, and wealth management. And as you've heard me say before, I am not satisfied in general that financial services are really cracking the challenges of great client experiences. And I'm joined by two very experienced innovators already making a huge impact in the financial services industry. Hamish, welcome. So Hamish Taylor, you're an award-winning former CEO whose world-leading customer-led transformation approach has inspired hundreds of companies across 48 countries to rethink their customer approach. He's also been dubbed the master thief, I love that, for his track record of transferring ideas from one sector to another. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, Adam Grainger, you're heading up Accomplish, who's pioneered the measurement and understanding of the key drivers of a great client experience. And you're working with asset management companies to pinpoint where the CX either out or underperforms. And you'll be bringing your thinking into the wider financial services community. So welcome, Adam.
Thanks very much. What gets measured gets managed, so it's great to be here.
Absolutely, well said. Now, of course, if you're listening, we do welcome your views and thoughts. And please do reach out to us directly or leave us a comment. And if you're listening live right now, we'd like to ask you for a favor, and that is to rate and review the episode. We really do hope you enjoy this podcast series. Now, as I said, today we're going to cover the topic incentives that inadvertently deprioritizes CX. Adam, let's start with you. Your thoughts.
So incentives, they're supposed to drive our focus, right? They're supposed to make clear what matters most. But do they? In practice, I think they often do something else entirely. I think they draw attention to what's easiest to measure, and that can actually distract us from what's most important. To whom? To the client. So this is all about financial services. In our industry, we operate in a world of metrics, dashboards, performance targets, and they give us structure and clarity, but they can also create blind spots. We've seen where that can lead in extreme cases, but more often the issue isn't headlines, it's habits. A support team will resolve an issue quickly, but only at the surface. Or, it might be a systemic issue, but they just solve it once and it keeps recurring. A relationship manager might hit their inflow targets, but lose a long-term client. Or a service rep might avoid escalation. That will hit their incentive, even if it means the client doesn't exactly get everything that they wanted or even just need it. No one's actually doing anything wrong there, but something's still not right. The clients might not complain, they might not leave, but they will remember and they may talk. And that's how trust erodes, trust in the brand, that Hamish was speaking about so eloquently in our previous episode. And that trust erodes not in dramatic exits, but in sort of quiet disappointments. These aren't bad behaviors, They're rational responses to systems that we, the financial services industry, have designed. In that last episode, we looked at how organizational structure fragments client experience. Well, incentives are how those structures speak. They signal what we value and over time what gets repeated. And right now, for our industry, many of those signals are pointing inwards, right?
Yeah.
They're pointing towards efficiency, they're pointing towards volumes, they're pointing towards compliance. All of those things are necessary, but they're all insufficient when you think about what the client values: responsiveness, clarity, follow through. And they all miss a current definition of what that success is. In the industry that I serve, asset management, that might look like celebrating a new business, but not celebrating client longevity, or rewarding responsiveness, but not rewarding the depth of engagement. But let's be honest, no one wants to be the leader who says, okay, everybody, slow down. Let's reward fewer things and maybe grow less for a little while. But long-term trust rarely comes from short-term comfort. And silence about that trade-off won't make it go away. It'll just make it harder to see.
Mm.
So I think there's a deeper truth underlying all of this, that incentives don't just reflect priorities, they shape them. And over time, they become the culture and the compass of that culture, whether or not you meant it. And realigning that compass is not easy, especially in organizations where performance metrics are tied to bonuses, to hierarchies, to long-standing reporting systems. But if we don't question what our incentives are steering us towards, we shouldn't be surprised if we drift away from the client.
Mm.
So to finish, where do we begin? Well, it's not a total rebuild. I would just advise, our listeners to, again, just think small, think with a reality check. Try asking your team or yourself what kind of behavior your current scorecard today is actually encouraging. And if a client could see that scorecard,
Mm.
would they think it helps them or
Mm.
just helps you? And those questions aren't about blame, they're about clarity, because incentives don't just drive performance, they define culture. And if we're serious about a culture that puts clients at the center, we need to reward the things that clients actually care about, not just the things that we find easiest to measure. And it's not just about the front line either. CX, HR, operations, finance, leadership, we all shape the systems that shape behavior. And if we define performance in ways that exclude the client, we shouldn't be surprised if the culture that follows does the same. So here's a question to leave everyone with. What signals are we sending through our targets, our goals, our bonuses that quietly shift the focus away from the client? Because if we're not brave enough to reward what matters, then we can't be surprised if what matters starts to disappear. So those are my thoughts on incentives.
Yeah, well said, Adam. Your thoughts, Hamish?
I mean, to wholeheartedly agree, first of all. I mean, look, of course,
Mm.
incentives make a difference and influence how we behave. And those might be personal incentives, such as individual bonuses, but they could simply be also, as Adam says, the way we measure individual departments' functions on their performance. And yeah, as usual, I've got a couple of quick stories around that. I think, one of the biggest challenges in a service business, as you know, I was a BA, I was chief exec of Eurostar. And, one of the biggest challenges is getting the right balance between operational efficiency and doing the right thing for customers. You mentioned the word efficiency a minute ago, Adam. And I remember in my BA days, I used to commute. I live in Edinburgh, okay, and I used to commute down to London for my job. So I'd come down on the morning shuttle. And all too often, the aeroplane would land at Heathrow. And instead of going to what was then the domestic terminal, Terminal 1, we get taken off to Terminal 4 on the other side of the airport. Why is it a problem? Because you then have to wait for steps, you have to wait for buses, you then get taken over to Terminal 1. And it probably added 40 or 45 minutes to the journey. You'd only been in the air for 50 minutes, and all of a sudden, you're virtually doubling your journey length. So, not surprisingly, I would call up the operations people and say, what's going on? Why are you doing this to us? And their answer was quite logical. That aircraft was needed later on in the day to go to Portugal. And from an aircraft movement efficiency point of view, it made more sense to bring the aircraft straight to Terminal 4 rather than Terminal 1. Yep, and avoided having to tow it later on. A totally logical decision if you're being measured on aircraft movement efficiency. However, the piece that was missing in this case was the fact that on the way down from Edinburgh, you've got a full flight of 250 full fare paying business travellers coming down on the early morning shuttle to go and work in London for the day. How many business travellers do you think were going to be on that plane to Portugal in midday? Very few. And what they've done is, yeah, they've upset a whole plane load of full fare paying passengers for the sake of aircraft efficiency for a flight that's only going to have 20 or 30 business travelers on it later. Not their fault. They're making a logical decision from an operations point of view, but for customer experience, it's a terrible decision. And I had a similar experience with Eurostar.
Quiet disappointments.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think actually it got a bit beyond that. I think
Or unquiet disappointments when you used to work for BA.
I think to these regular travellers, I think it got beyond more quiet. But, but I mean, I had similar things at Eurostar as well. I remember we had once where we had to, the ski train that came up from the Alps used to go through Ashford in Kent at 5 in the morning. When they were building the high-speed line, they had to shut the line until 7 o'clock. So they had to find 2 hours somewhere to delay the train. And you couldn't leave late from France or anything because of all the do with path networks and things. So what they decided was we're going to have to put that train at night in a siding for a couple of hours. Not ideal, but it was the only solution. The problem is the solution they chose was a siding that was 800 yards short of Ashford Station, and 70% of our passengers were going to get off the train at Ashford Station. Get all their ski equipment. And again, operationally, it was absolutely the right decision. It's just about, and it comes down to exactly what you said about measures and incentives, Adam. So lesson number one for me is this: we've got to get the way we measure individual functions aligned with the best customer experience. Measuring overall customer experience is not enough. We need to bring it down to an individual functional level of measures and incentives. And it can work, and it can work really positively. I mean, my favorite story actually is about a guy called Adrian Watts. I'm going to give him a shout out today. And he was my sales director at Eurostar, super guy. And he changed the call center. And traditional call center measures, it was about how long are you on the call, get that ticket sold, move on to the next customer. He said, no, actually what this is about is creating excitement about the trip. We want people to be excited about the trip. When they put the phone down, we want them to think, I can't wait to get on that trip to Paris or Brussels or wherever it was going to be. And that
How did he achieve
he
that?
he did an awful lot of training and work with them, but more importantly, he changed the incentive schemes. And he actually started managing the call center around the extent to which they were creating excitement and conversion. And what happened was call lengths went like that, but conversion went through the roof. But traditional call center measures wouldn't have allowed him to go there. And I've always thought that, what a super guy and what a great job he did. So again, it's
Very clever, because so much value for your holiday comes before it even happens.
absolutely
Through that excitement that Adrian was creating.
well, exactly. And what we had discovered was that was what you needed to sell on Eurostar for leisure travelers. It wasn't go on the train, it's better than the aeroplane. It was actually getting people to do the trip in the first place. So when they phone up with an inquiry, you've got to get them excited about making the trip rather than just they called up out of interest to make an inquiry. So yeah, get the non-customer facing departments understanding these were customer facing, but it's about getting the non-customer facing ones as well excited. One other aspect I wanted to raise actually before I shut up finally was around another type of incentive, which is the incentives you give to externally to your customers and how they can actually inadvertently hurt customer experience as well. Incentives such as promotions to the customer, we need to be careful here as well, because in many industries, including, sad to say, financial services, promotions are often shorthand version of saying price discounts. And by doing that, what are you saying to the marketplace? You're setting the agenda for customers that says what is important is price rather than value or customer experience. And in doing so, we actually undermine the value of customer experience because we've changed the agenda and set an agenda that's all about price. Now, in consumer goods, we try to avoid price promotions, despite the pressure we got from the supermarkets. Instead, you try and do things which add value or give something extra, whether it's a giveaway or entry into competitions or offers on other product ranges like a wine club or whatever. And that way, you're adding value to your offer rather than devaluing it by making the story all about price and giving the same thing away just cheaper. So if I wanted to be provocative today, what I would say is, if you're having to use price discounts to incentivize your customers, then you've failed in demonstrating your value to those customers. So you really need to get back to thinking about the customer experience. So 2 summaries. Internally, don't let the efficiency incentivators dominate or you will hurt your customer experience. Externally, avoid using price as your incentive, add value instead. There you go, off my soapbox again.
I like that, Hamish. I like that. I was just I seeing this new ad from Nationwide where they've just said thank you and they've given all of their members £50 in the UK.
Mm.
And it's not an incentive, it's just a way to say thank you, which I find really interesting. It's not to buy anything, it's not to discount anything, it's just £50. Doesn't matter how long you've been with them, whether it was 1 month, 10 years, they gave you £50 just to say thank you for enabling them to be the best that they can be. And I think that's
I
incredible
think it is.
as one.
I've got a similar one,
Yeah.
actually, from customer point of view. I'm a gold card holder at British Airways, and
Yeah.
we get given 3 or 4 of these each year, which are our gold cards. And what you do is you fill it in for a staff member that's given you particularly good service. You write a little spiel about it, you give it to them, they hand it to their manager, and they get a reward for it.
Oh, that's brilliant. Love that. I love that. In my experience, I received in one of the surveys feedback from a client, and fortunately, it wasn't on a bank I was working at. It was on another private bank, in fact. And it said, "Bankers are like children. They only ever come to me when they want more money." And I know we thought about that, and we thought about then what does that meant. And thankfully, it wasn't on the bank I was working at. But in terms of scorecards and incentivization, a lot of it is about how much you're going to sell, and broken off by different products ranges as well. And so inadvertently, we were creating a scorecard and paying our people to push product. And so we really had to think about that quite carefully so that we wouldn't be the private bank that he was referring to. And I think that's so important to bring it to that individual level because that's how you change behaviors. And I like your idea, Hamish, about, and yours as well, Adam, where you start to think about how do you drive incentivization, not just for the sales organizations, but everyone to think about their role they have vis-a-vis clients, and that we drive the right behaviors.
I saw recently, actually, on that one, Melanie, I worked with a client of mine recently where I was working on this kind of area, and it was their finance function, and they realized that actually the issue was in the way they were managing invoicing and invoices was actually what was getting in the way of the customer experience. So they actually spent time incentivizing their staff to improve the customer experience with invoicing, which I thought was great.
Oh, I see.
No one
That's brilliant. It goes back to service centers. Service centers, as you said, they're rewarded based on how many calls they take rather than on the quality of the call. And at one point in time, I even said, it doesn't matter how long it takes for you to be on a call. I'd rather have a happy customer at the end of it than worry about how quickly you're able to churn through the calls. So it's so true that the way we incentivize can really drive inadvertently the wrong behaviors vis-a-vis client, right?
Yes. And I want to come back because to that point about the length on, or to two things actually. Firstly, picking up on your point there about the length of a client service call, and was a gentleman's name Adrian Watts, Hamish. So I'm wondering if we can apply the Adrian Watts methodology to financial services. What was he doing there? He was creating excitement in a product. Now, I've literally just thrown down some thoughts on a piece of paper here, but I'm trying to think about that. That's a really wonderful thing. What a great achievement for those customers of, I think it was Eurostar, right? So how can our financial services listeners apply that? Well, what products could you create some excitement about? For sure, not every financial services product, but what about a first bank account for I don't know what the age is now. It was 16 when I was a kid. What about a first mortgage? From my example from a previous episode, what about a first investment performance report for professional client? Because linking to the second point that I wanted to make, to pick up on something that you said, Melanie, we must just remember that clients are just like us. They're just humans, right? So I think your point was bankers only ever get in touch when they want some money. And that made me think about networking theory. If you only ever try and activate your network when you want something, it won't work. You are a good networker if you have a good answer to the following question. When was the last time you got in touch with so and so when you didn't need something?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the genuine care. And you really care about your network, or you really care about your customer and your client, right? And what I've seen really work well is when we incentivize the organization to meet with clients. Doesn't matter whether you're in operations, you're the CEO, not just the sales organization. And ask the question, when last did they meet with a client, or when last did they get involved in a client journey? And really drive those right client outcomes. I've really seen the work that Hamish and I have done before in one of the banks was we designed a client promise, and then we ask every single person, so what can you do to improve the experience? And there was a guy in our finance department who said, well, actually, I know through the data, we can see when our clients' birthdays are. They've given us permission to use that data. So it's, we can use that and we can actually send them a happy birthday automatically from the bank. What a great idea. So small things can happen. And so one of the things that program, in terms of developing that client promise, was if we started to include in the year-end reviews how many actions you took to help improve the client experience as a measure to drive the right behaviors, whether you were in operations or in finance, and to bring the rest of the organization on that journey. So,
And I think we're linking back to something we talked about before as well. I think the reason you're able to do that is because the client promise, when it's developed, is about the benefit to the customer. It's about the output, not the input.
yeah,
As a result of us being brilliant
that's
at what
right.
we do, the customer gets this benefit. And if you can get everybody focused
Yeah,
on the output come for the customer, that's when it becomes really interesting in terms and gets people thinking about how could I, like the BA one I gave the other day, how could I help people arrive ready for business? What do I do?
yeah,
And I think what's interesting about the one that we worked on in financial, and I've seen it in other ones as well, is when you start putting feelings in there. We're incentivizing people
yeah.
against how we want the customer to feel, not what we're going to do for them, but how we want them to feel at the end of it. And that opens the door to really incentivizing people in the right way to do the right thing. It's amazing how many clients I work with now when I work on customer promises or client promises, how many of them, one of the pillars of their customer promise is what else can we do to make the customer feel valued, to make them believe that we really care about
Yeah,
them, not about us.
yeah, I totally agree.
I know
Yeah,
we need to watch time, but I don't want to
Yeah, come on, throw it in.
sort of, put my arms around those last 2 points that you guys have each made and tell another story. I was similar to the work that you were mentioning, Melanie, that you guys did around the
yeah,
customer promise and asked everybody in the organization. I once heard a story in the asset management industry when I said, well, I was talking to someone who does the physical security, for one of these organizations. And I was saying, well, you probably rarely get brought in. And he said, well, actually, we did something similar to the exercise that you were mentioning. And as a result of that, for really, the platinum level clients, they will give them a tour of the physical security with all the screens and all that
Yep.
sort of stuff with, the simple point that this is how well we look after our assets. Look
Wow.
how
wow,
look how well we look after our humans, our
Yep.
people. If we do this for those assets, just, and so think about the customer promise and think about the feelings that you
Yeah.
guys have mentioned as well. What does
yeah,
that leave those really important clients feeling? It
Yeah.
leaves them feeling
Absolutely.
things are pretty well looked after here.
I did some work a while back for a company that would do facilities management and security, and they were pitching for the Globe Theatre, the Shakespearean Theatre in London at the time.
Oh yeah.
And you're right. And
Uh,
they built the whole premise around actually, our security is here to enhance the Shakespearean experience of your customers. So we're going to do
oh,
security
that's
in a
brilliant.
different way. We're not going to put them in modern uniforms. We're not, and you're right. What they were looking at is what a great outcome looked like for their customer, the theatre, and how could we
uh,
therefore do
uh,
things in a different way than the traditional security guys
uh.
in sort of black outfits that are standing there looking mean.
I love that story. Well, look, thank you to you both. And I'm loving these new stories coming out as well and
Yeah.
examples. Now, listeners, thank you for joining us. We do hope you found this discussion useful and that you'll join us for future episodes. I really want to hear from you. If you have subjects you want to have us debate or discuss, we would really welcome them. Please do share with us directly or in the comments section. And if you like this episode, can I please ask you to take a few moments after this to please share it with a colleague or a friend, especially those that you think will find it useful for what they do in their careers and their jobs. Now, in our next episode of Competitive CX, we're going to cover, drum roll,
Uh,
Regulator is a friend or a foe to CX.
Ooh.
One,
Dear was it to come up with all of these difficult
I
challenges.
I tell you, I can't wait for this one. So, look, don't miss out. And we do wish you all have a good day and hope you too can go and create a competitive CX. Thanks for listening to this episode of Competitive CX, the podcast dedicated to insights for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. We hope you found valuable strategies for enhancing client engagement in your organization.
If you enjoyed the discussion, please subscribe to Competitive CX and leave a rating and a review. Your feedback helps us reach more finance professionals seeking to overcome their CX challenges.
And you can stay up to date with the latest in client experience by following us on LinkedIn for resources designed to help you innovate and improve financial services.
Join us next time as we continue exploring how to transform client experiences in finance. Until then, keep pushing boundaries and striving for excellence in the client experience.